Hi there, I'm Professor Blackmore, and I want to welcome you to ProfessorBlackmore.com, where our goal is to empower results through real productivity. And if you haven't been here before, I want to invite you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel and then click the bell so that you'll be notified whenever I post new videos on this topic and whenever I may go live. And please also follow me on TikTok and Instagram. And I had to come back to you today to review further completely and utterly mind-boggling developments surrounding the Alec Baldwin shooting on the set of the movie Rust in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And as you know, the director of photography, Halyna Hutchins, was killed, and director Joel Souza was injured when Alec Baldwin fired a gun on the set, causing a live bullet projectile to strike Halyna and to exit her body, entering the body of the director Joel Souza, causing him to suffer gunshot injuries. So I'm sure you've heard that Alec Baldwin decided to sit down for an interview with George Stephanopoulos, and I would encourage you to watch it for yourself. It was something to behold, and all I can say is I'm completely exhausted, but I'm not too tired to tell you what I think about this crazy mixed up mess. But before I go any further, I want to say boldly and out front, for those of you who won't stick around until the end, but who will still clap back at me in the comments, I want you to be clear that I am clearly saying that Alec Baldwin was negligent, but from a civil law standpoint. And even after this disastrous interview, at this time, I still do not believe that Alec Baldwin is criminally negligent. I certainly believe that he's facing real exposure of multiple six-figure civil judgments and or settlements. Now, at first, I was of the mind that he is speaking against the better wishes of his attorneys, because I just would never be able to continue on in a case with a client who lacks the self-discipline to remain silent in the face of such uncertainty. And the reason that I felt he was speaking against his attorney's wishes is because there was just blatant ignorance at times of basic things to such a mind-boggling degree. But then there were also times where you could tell that he had clearly been prepped by attorneys. Now, just like the interview that I previewed of Assistant Director David Hall's attorney, you'll see that there are certain things that Alec Baldwin's legal team wanted to get out in an attempt to shift blame where needed in order to negate one or more elements of some of the potential civil negligence claims. And I hope that you'll take some time out to go back and review the video that I did in which I previewed David Hall's attorney's response and remarks. But at the same time, it seemed that there was care taken to also make sure that Alec Baldwin did not run afoul of any criminal negligence. Now, the sheriff investigating the criminal aspects of the case spoke out about some of Alec Baldwin's statements in the interview. But I'll get to that a little later, and you'll have to stick around to see my reactions to the sheriff's reactions. And although I still do not believe that Alec Baldwin is criminally culpable, you just can never be too sure, and you want to preserve your Fifth Amendment right to remain silent in the face of such uncertainty. While Alec Baldwin and his team want to make us think that Alec Baldwin does not believe that he'll be criminally charged, you can see that every effort is being made to try to keep Alec Baldwin out of prison. And you can see that while some think that this was an effort on Alec Baldwin's part to get out in front of the public opinion argument, the audience that him and his legal team is mostly speaking to is the prosecutor in the case. So I'm going to go step by step through some of the questions, but to tell you the truth, there was just so many things said. It's hard to figure out the order in which to tackle this. I mean, do you tackle the statements in the order in which they were made during the interview, or do you take the most egregious and work your way down to the least egregious? And although I just can't resist the urge to start with the most egregious thing, in my opinion, that he said, I'm going to exercise a little self-control and self-discipline and take things in the jaw-dropping order in which he said them. And so here is the least jaw-dropping thing that he said.
It wasn't in the script for the trigger to be pulled.
Well, the trigger wasn't pulled. I didn't pull the trigger.
So you never pulled the trigger?
No. I would never point a gun at anyone and pull a trigger at them. Never. That was the training that I had. You don't point a gun at me and pull the trigger. On day one of my instruction in this business, people said to me, never take a gun and go click, 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 because even though it's incremental, you damage the firing pin on the gun if you do that. Don't do that.
And Hall's attorney told ABC News that he was watching and agrees that Alec did not pull the trigger and that his finger was outside the trigger guard.
As you can see, the least egregious thing that Alec Baldwin says is that he did not pull the trigger. Quite frankly, everybody is feeding off of this particular soundbite, but in a minute, I'm going to tell you what I think is the most egregious thing he said. But you'll have to hold on and stick around until the end of my video. So I'm just going to work with this first least egregious thing that Alec Baldwin said when he claims that he did not pull the trigger. So you'll remember from my prior videos that I made the point that it was incorrect for everyone in the media to be using the term misfire. And so I'll say it again. When you mistakenly fire a weapon that you later decide that you should not have fired, that's not a misfire. And even after Alec Baldwin stated that he never pulled the trigger, I'm even more sure now that this is exactly what we have here. A person who mistakenly fired a weapon that he later decided that he should not have fired or that he did not intend to fire. But I can see that the attorneys want to make this misfire scenario nonetheless. And they're trying to get there by having Alec Baldwin say that he did not pull the trigger. And if he did not pull the trigger, then people are going to be thinking, okay, well then what happened? Did the trigger just pull itself? I mean, was there some misfunction of the mechanical functions of the gun? This is where they're trying to go. They're trying to get into that misfire scenario. But this theory shows the ignorance of Alec Baldwin and his entire legal team about the facts about guns. So you'll think. It seems to me that ignorance is exactly what they are trying to get across to the prosecutor. So if the reporting is true that this was a single action firearm, you can see that it's possible for the gun to fire as soon as the hammer is dropped, especially so depending on how hard and fast the hammer is dropped. And so releasing the hammer can be just the same as pulling the trigger. And so you can understand why I could feel the gray matter inside my head just gush out when Alec Baldwin said this.
What's the scene supposed to be?
The scene is the two guys are there who have got me, cornered, and they think I'm shot pretty bad, and I'm kind of wilting, and they have a gun, and then a sound outside distracts them, and I then draw the gun, cross-draw out of my holster, pull the gun up like that, and start to cock the pistol cut. But we kept doing this, and so then I said to her, now in this scene, I'm going to cock the gun. I said, do you want to see that? And she said, yes. So I take the gun and I start to cock the gun. I'm not going to pull the trigger. I said, do you see that? She goes, well, just cheat it down and tilt it down a little bit like that. And I cock the gun. I go, can you see that? Can you see that? Can you see that? And she says, and then I let go of the hammer of the gun and the gun goes off.
And so as you can see, he clearly admits that he released the hammer on the gun. And so once I collected the gray matter and put it back in my head, I began to see that Alec Baldwin's legal team seems to think that they need to make him seem as ignorant as possible, because if it can demonstrate that he didn't know how a single action gun works, while the civil responsibility remains strong, the criminal exposure lessens if he can negate the criminal state of mind necessary to bring this over into the criminal column. And so it seemed that their job in that particular portion of the interview was to take this case, the state of mind requisite of this case, and to lessen the ability of the prosecutor to prove up that criminal state of mind needed to prove the criminal allegation at the time of trial. So when you couple this incredible ignorance with some of the heartfelt things that Alec Baldwin said about Helena Hutchins and the crying profusely throughout the interview, it removes this from the malice column, which is one of the highest levels of criminal state of mind that the prosecution would need to prove any type of intentional act. But in addition, it seems that his legal team thinks that the live bullets piece of the puzzle removes this from the criminally reckless and/or criminally negligent column, because he would not have released the hammer had he known there was any chance there could be any live rounds anywhere near the set. Now, before you clap back at me in the comments, I want you to wait until I put another piece with this. I know that it's the opinion of everyone, and it's my opinion as well, that you have to exercise extreme caution whenever you merely point a gun in the direction of any human beings. But I want you just to hold on, because this all fits together to be able to negate the requisite criminal state of mind that we're talking about. Remember, I maintain that we have civil negligence here in spades. And so regarding the statement that Alec Baldwin made that he did not pull the trigger, we'll have to see how this strategy will work out. But this is what the sheriff said in reaction to Alec Baldwin's statement that he did not pull the trigger. Now, although after hearing this, it would seem to leave Alec Baldwin and his legal team feeling less than satisfactory confidence about the effect of this interview on Alec Baldwin's criminal exposure, the sheriff is not the prosecutor. And it is the prosecutor who would know that the criminal state of mind of a person is key, even if they are carrying out a clearly reckless or negligent act, which I will discuss a little bit more later. And so here is the most jaw-dropping thing, in my opinion, that Alec Baldwin said in the interview.
And you were rehearsing that scene. Was it an actual rehearsal? There's some disagreement about that, whether it was a formal rehearsal at that time.
This is a marking rehearsal where I'm going to show her. She's standing next to the camera. She's like this. You're me. She's got a monitor here. The camera is here filming that way. She takes a monitor that is his monitor, the operator, and turns it toward her. It swivels, and she says to me, hold the gun lower. Go to your right. Okay, right there. All right, do that. Now, show it a little bit lower. And she's getting me to position the gun. Everything is in her direction. She's guiding me through how she wants me to hold the gun for this angle. And I draw the gun out, and I find a mark. I draw the gun out, I find a cut. And what's really urgent is the gun wasn't meant to be fired in that angle.
So if you're shooting directly into the camera lens, you're not aiming?
I'm not shooting into the camera lens. I'm shooting just off.
Just off.
Right, in her direction. I'm holding the gun where she told me to hold it, which ended up being aimed right in below her armpit, was what I was told. I don't know. This was a completely incidental shot. People said to me, I got countless people online saying, you idiot, you never point a gun at someone. Well, unless you're told it's empty, and it's the director of photography who's instructing you on the angle for a shot we're going to do. And she and I had this thing in common where we both thought it was empty, and it wasn't. And that's not her responsibility. That's not my responsibility. Whose responsibility is remains to be seen. But
Well, there are some who say you're never supposed to point a gun at anyone on a set, no matter what.
Unless the person is the cinematographer who's directing me where to point the gun for her camera angle. That's exactly what happened.
So, as you can clearly see here, Alec Baldwin is actually stating that it was Helena Hutchins who directed him to point the gun in her direction and to maneuver the hammer of the gun. And so as you can see, this is another attempt to further shift responsibility. But, my God, do you try to shift the responsibility to the deceased victim? I thought that was extremely egregious, and it left my jaw completely on the floor. Irrespective of what Alec Baldwin is actually saying about whether he thinks he'll face criminal charges, when he makes this statement about the deceased victim, it is clear to me that Alec Baldwin is fighting for his life to stay out of prison here. Because you would never say anything like this until the time of a civil or criminal trial. But clearly, Alec Baldwin is trying to convince the sheriff and, more importantly, the prosecutor that they do not want to press charges by showing them the theory of his case, which would be that the deceased victim actually instructed Alec Baldwin to point the gun at her while maneuvering the hammer. In addition, regarding any civil claim brought by the other individual that was shot when the bullet went through Helena Hutchins, you can see that Alec Baldwin is trying to shift some of the responsibility for that over to Helena Hutchins to reduce his own exposure. So again, even in light of the sheriff's strong reaction to Alec Baldwin saying he did not pull the trigger, the sheriff is not the prosecutor who would know that the criminal state of mind of a person is key, even if they're carrying out a clearly reckless or negligent act. The question is going to be, why did the person carry out the act? Did he have clearly criminal intentions? Did he actively intend to kill somebody? And we know that we just do not have these facts. Then the prosecutor is going to be asking if he carried out an act that was reckless to the degree that he had a clear disregard for human life. And it's going to be hard to prove this state of mind, a reckless disregard for human life, beyond a reasonable doubt in the face of facts through evidence and testimony that will be given at the time of trial that will likely establish that the deceased victim herself actually instructed Alec Baldwin to carry out each act in his maneuvering of the gun that ultimately led to her own death and the injury of another person on the set. You just can't get around the fact that those are just some strong facts that a prosecutor would have to challenge at the time of trial. So it seems that what's coming together here is the guns used on the set were not just dedicated solely for that purpose, i.e. to be used only on the set of the Rust movie. Now, there was talk about target practice and other things that these same guns may have been used for. So it seems that a live projectile or a fragment of a live projectile was lodged in the firing mechanism of the gun, such that when the blanks were loaded and Alec Baldwin released the hammer, the live projectile or fragment came out and killed Helena Hutchins and injured another person. And depending on how fast and hard that hammer was dropped, it could have caused the trigger to maneuver in the backwards direction, firing the gun. Now, I know there will be many of you gun experts who will correct any of my inaccuracies about the facts of how this single action gun works. But it is my understanding that it takes little pressure at all to cause that trigger to move back once that hammer is pulled back and released. Now, I do not think that Alec Baldwin did one thing to help his civil exposure by doing this interview. But from a criminal perspective, he put on the performance of a lifetime. And in this regard, he was able to accomplish the following. He was able to demonstrate clear, almost unbelievable ignorance about how a single action gun operates. And in doing so, his theory is to chip away at the idea that he knew what would happen when he released the hammer. When you put this clear ignorance together with all of the compassionate words and the crying, the idea is to demonstrate that he did not have a reckless disregard for human life. In addition, he sets forth a theory of the case that reminds the prosecutor that he's too ignorant to have the requisite state of mind, and the real guilty mind is the person who intentionally, recklessly, or negligently caused the live rounds to be anywhere near the movie set. Now, there are some recent developments on this front as well, but you'll have to join me in my next video on this topic to get my take on the civil and/or criminal culpability of this or these particular individuals. Then, In bold and even blockbuster fashion, Alec Baldwin reminds the prosecutor that it would be difficult to prove that he had a reckless disregard for human life because the life and being, i.e., Elena Hutchins herself, actually instructed him to do each act that led up to the fatal shooting. So if he had a reckless disregard for her life, you might find yourself also admitting that she also had a reckless disregard for life and the lives of others standing in the vicinity of where she was standing. And so for those of you who want to clap back at me in the comments, you're going to say he should not have pointed the gun. It's going to be hard to get around the fact that the person that he was pointing the gun at actually told him to point the gun at her. Now, I know this all sounds crazy, but we'll have to see how effective this strategy is. And I strongly encourage you to watch the whole interview yourself. And yes, I am bracing myself for any comments that I may receive in the comments section, but be nice. But if you agree or disagree with my analysis of this jaw-dropping, mind-blowing, blockbuster testimony, please leave your comments in the comment section of this video. And until next time, and even if you don't agree with me, if you've enjoyed this video, please give me a big thumbs up. And please also subscribe to my YouTube channel and click the bell so you'll be notified when I post new videos on this and other topics, or whenever I may go live. And please also follow me on TikTok and Instagram.